Welcome to the D6 Family Ministry Podcast, a place where ideas, principles, and personalities come together to give you a ministry advantage that empowers the church and home.
I don't know anything more important in our society or in the kingdom of God than to help the church, help the family.
Discipleship is not an event, it's a way of life.
And one day it just hit me that discipleship at home was not about doing more. It was about inviting Christ into what we were already doing.
The goal of family ministry is not families sitting on the couch holding hands and singing Kumbaya. The ultimate goal is families that love God, love people, and make disciples of all peoples.
So that's why you're here. You're here to say 1 hour a week, as significant and as awesome as it is, we know that it's not enough and we want to be intentional with every hour.
You're listening to the D6 Podcast. Here are your hosts, Marianne Howard, Ron Hunter, and Josh Wooten.
I am so excited about today's guest. I've kind of given him my own title, and that is he is a minister of words.
That's a good title for him.
He's the Mao, the minister of words. The Mao.
Daniel Darling, sir, you are the minister of words, and you challenged and stirred my heart in a lot of areas. So I am very excited about today's podcast. Before we get started, though, I want to have a little bit of fun and find out from Ron and Josh, what social media platforms are you on? And if you could choose only one, which one would you choose?
Oh my goodness gracious. I have a confession. I love them all. I feel like I'm on just about every social media platform there is. Snapchat is only for my family chat and to make sure my son is staying above board. I have a 16-year-old son. I'm just keeping it real, people. And I like the old-fashioned Facebook. There's more interaction, and we utilize it as our family's digital family album, our family scrapbook. Mm-hmm. And we are the first link in our family's digital family tree. And so when people want to go back and learn about their old Grandpa Josh, they'll go back to Facebook, and there it all is. So I enjoy the others, but I've reached a point in life where Facebook is probably my favorite.
Well, for me, it might surprise you. I do have more than one. I am on Instagram and Pinterest. I just don't promote that. Those are more utilitarian for me. I observe more on Instagram rather than post. But you can find me there. I am actually on Pinterest every single day. And I feel a little like I might need to surrender part of my man card when I say that. However, I find two things out there extensively. So my Pinterest feed's always given me areas, but again, woodworking, tons of idea generation out there for woodworking and projects like that. And then the other one is recipes. I am the cook in our family, and I like finding creative new ideas to cook and bring into our family to add to my quote repertoire of abilities. But the one I'm most active on that I generate content for is Twitter. I was a very early adopter for that one. So my Twitter is at Ron Hunter without having to come up with anything creative. And I primarily use it for certainly promoting items of family ministry and leadership. Those are my two areas of interest. I don't spend a lot of time on there with personal sides. I am an introvert, and therefore I tend to think that people don't care about me personally. So I'm not generally going to toss out personal sides. I do occasionally, and I do have a dry wit on there when I do, but those are my three that I get involved with. What about you, Marianne?
I am on Instagram, Facebook, and Pinterest. And I'm kind of like you. I'm a creator. And so I'm a quilter. I don't know if you guys, the audience, knew that about me, but I quilt. Yes. And I like to just, see what some other creators are doing. also for recipes. From time to time, I'll go and see what's out there. They're really good about easy recipes. Pinterest is, and sometimes for me, saving time is always of value. So if I can find something that I can throw into like one dish, I'm all about it.
That's right. And it's a good place to find copycat recipes too.
Yes. Yeah. Like Olive Garden fettuccine.
There you go.
Yes.
And if you're not into saving time, and if you're into totally wasting time, you download TikTok, and that will just eat. My goodness gracious. I'm going to have to delete the app.
Don't need any time wasters.
No, I do not.
The 3 I have waste enough of it.
Oh yeah. So Daniel, the minister of words, what's the words that jumped out at you that our audience needs to cue in on as we get towards this interview?
He talks about us, how he said that words are what separates us from every other creation, and in the beginning was the Word, and it's just right from the start. That is how we communicate. That is what separates us from others. And I just thought that was a really simplistic yet powerful statement on the same.
I was really something I would encourage you to think about as you're listening to this. And I just want you to know, listeners, the Holy Spirit is about to step on your toes. And that is always a good thing when we listen to a podcast and we go in with one perspective and we leave changed on the other side of it. This one for sure is going to do that for you today. But he just said this, and I want you to think about this as you're listening to his entire podcast. We don't always have to have an opinion on all things all the time. I just want to challenge our listeners as you're listening to this and you think about your own posts, and you've heard me say this, we practice this in our homes, but we practice this as a podcast family, having conversations, red light, yellow light, green light. That applies to our life socially, on social media. Red light, yellow light, green light. Ask permission before you post.
I think that is brilliant. So I'm going to take that a step further than what Marianne's had. I'm going to ask everybody to go into yellow light mode right now, slow down. And I want you to ask yourself if there are some red lights that you should start applying in your social media practices. How about that one?
Yes.
As the Supreme said, stop in the name of love.
I was going to quote Vanilla Ice, who said, stop, collaborate, and listen.
There's that age gap we got going on between us, Marianne. Beautiful.
Oh my goodness.
I love it.
Well, as we jump into the new year, before we get to this interview, I do want to be very, very open with you about an area that we would solicit your help on. And that is supporting the ministries of D6 Family. And we have recently, in the end of last year, installed a giving button on our website. And we offer the D6 podcast absolutely free of charge. We offer Top Reads free of charge. We offer our D6 Family app and the family questions on it free of charge. There's a number of items that we continue to do because we are a nonprofit organization that ministry is at heart. If you love chaplains, we supply our chaplains, many of our chaplains, with complimentary materials. Church planters, we help them. Global outreach around the world and family ministry. And we would just ask if, starting out the new year, if you love and this resonates with you and you want to see this continue in a wonderful way, we would just ask you to consider becoming one of the people who donate on a monthly basis. I am one of those people. I support our ministries personally. I'm not just an employee. I'm not just a worker, but I believe in what we do. And I'm out there supporting as well. And I would invite you to do that. So check out our website and click on the giving button and see what God leads you to do. But we do solicit your prayer. We are so thankful that you are a regular listener of ours. We're going to take a commercial break, and when we come back, the great Mal is going to speak to us, Daniel Darling.
Yes, and just a little side note there. This interview was actually taped back in late October, right before the election took place and right before Thanksgiving and Christmas. So you may hear a nod or two to that, but the content and the material is excellent and is not time sensitive in that regards.
Great reminder there, Josh. Thanks so much.
Today, I am joined by Daniel Darling, the Senior VP for Communications at National Religious Broadcasters. Daniel served for 6 years as the VP of Communications for the ERLC, and he's the author of 9 books, including The Characters of Christmas and his latest, A Way with Words, Using Our Online Conversations for Good. Dan, thanks for coming back on the podcast and joining us again.
And it's a delight to be back on here with my one of my favorite St. Louis Cardinals fans.
Am I your only St. Louis Cardinal fan friend, or do you have others?
Not the only, because, you know, the gospel bridges divides and brings people together across divisions, but you're among my favorite Cardinal fans, put it that way.
I'll take that. Yeah. Well, and we're going to get into that a little bit later, so we'll hold off on that. But the last time we spoke, you had just released The Dignity Revolution. With your latest book, A Way with Words, you've taken that same idea of dignity and you've really zeroed in on social media. What inspired you to tackle this topic?
Well, you know, there's 2 reasons, really. I mean, first, you know, I've always loved words. I mean, like, I've been, you know, involved and around words my whole life. You know, when I was a kid, I read a lot, and our family got 3 newspapers every day, and I would read them from the time I was like really young. We didn't have a TV, so we either read or we listened to the radio. And then in junior high, I had a teacher who really inspired me to be a writer. When she just, you know, she looked at a few assignments I turned in and said, you know, I think you're pretty good at this. You know, when you're in middle school, junior high, you know, to have someone tell you you're actually good at something is like a big deal. So that kind of set a trajectory for me. And I've always been working with words. I mean, my whole career, whether I'm preaching or, you know, speaking or working in communications for different organizations, I've always been around words. And of course, I've been writing for, you know, 20 years, whether it's articles or books or things like that. And so I've always just had a love affair with words, and it strikes me that Christianity is a religion of words. You know, God spoke the world into existence. We read in Genesis, and He created us as image bearers. And one of the things that distinguishes us from the rest of creation is the high level in which we communicate. I mean, animals can kind of communicate in some rudimentary ways, but you don't see an animal writing a novel, right? So that's kind of what separates us, words and language. And we have a God who speaks. Jesus is described as the Word of God, the Logos. And so that's kind of really what set me on this trajectory. The Bible has a lot to say about our words, the shape of our words, from the book of Proverbs, which has a lot of admonition about how we speak. And then also, you know, James talking about words that can either bring life or death, that can either injure or inspire. So that's kind of the long reason why I did this. The second reason is just, you know, we're in this digital age where it's never been easier to publish, never been easier to communicate. With a few strokes of our keyboard, a few taps of our thumbs, you know, we can publish our thoughts to the world. And I'm someone who, though I see the perverse incentives of social media and I see kind of what these mediums can do and can be in a dangerous way, I don't think we're going back. I don't sense we're going to go back to the 1950s or we're going to suddenly become Amish. So we have to ask ourselves, how do we steward our words on these platforms? This is where people are engaging. So how do we do this in a way that glorifies Christ?
Yeah, and it seems that there's an aspect of social media that's become a wasteland with false information, half-truths, photoshopped pictures, lies galore. Why has it become so tempting for people to post things without even stopping to consider if those things are true?
Well, I mean, I think there's a perverse incentive to just say whatever's on your mind. I think it's complicated. We have a media environment where there's a reward for being first and being fast, and not necessarily for accuracy. And then we have a social media environment where there's this pressure that I have to say something. You know, silence is violence. If I don't say something, then I'm complicit, which is really interesting when you think 20 years ago we didn't have social media, so nobody knew. Yeah, like nobody knew what someone 5 states away thought about some global crisis, you know, and yet today we do. And so as Christians, I think we have to ask ourselves, before we post, before we advance a story, is this true? do I have all the facts? And am I the right person to speak about it? It very well could be. Or it could be that maybe I need to wait a day or two to see what the facts are before I get ahead of it. Maybe this is something I need to sit out. Those are all considerations. James 1:19 says, let everyone be quick to listen, slow to speak, slow to anger. I think in this age we'd say, let everyone be quick to read the whole story, slow to post, and slow to internet rage.
Yeah, and you even say in your book, we don't have to engage every Christian controversy. Now, there will be some that would push back on that and say, like you mentioned, silence is violence or silence is compliance. How would you answer that critique of those who are saying, no, Christians need to be speaking up on all of these issues? Where are the Christians? How come Christians aren't speaking up on this or this or this or this? What would you say to that?
I mean, I don't think we always have to have an opinion all the time. And I laugh when people will say, well, your evangelical leaders silent. And it's like, well, maybe they're not silent, but they're not on the same platform as you, right? Tim Keller may very well be talking to his elders right now, or he may be visiting someone in the hospital right now. So this idea that you're not doing justice unless you're rage tweeting all the time is just ridiculous. The idea that unless you're as mad as me, on the same platform as me, about the same issue as me, at the same time as me, you don't care. And I think we have to get rid of that notion. I do think we should use our voice and raise our voices about injustice, about issues that matter, to speak up for the vulnerable, to speak up for truth, to preach the good word of the gospel. I think we should use these platforms for that. But the idea that we always have to say something publicly, really, I don't think is really warranted.
Now, let's switch gears for a minute. I want to go back to baseball. Like I said, you're a big Chicago Cubs fan. I don't understand how someone can be a Cubs fan when everyone knows that Wrigley Field is just a front for a drug trafficking ring. And I know this because I read it on the internet, so it has to be true, which, no, it's not true at all. But it's not more outlandish than some of the conspiracy theories we hear out there. It seems like people are so attracted to the absurd and to just the inside knowledge. Why are people so attracted to these conspiracy theories, whether it has to do with the pandemic or the government or anything at all?
Well, that's a good question. I think, first of all, there's always going to be some level of people who are going to believe in conspiracy theories in any age, in any time, in any organization, in any time in history. We're in a fallen world, and you're always going to have that. But my thesis is that belief in conspiracy theories rises when trust in institutions is low. So if you think about it and look around, all of our institutions in public life have failed us in the last several decades, right? The church, the government, financial institutions, educational institutions, the media. There's hardly an institution that hasn't failed. So when that happens and there's a failure of trust in leadership, there's a lack of trust, conspiracy theories are going to rise. And you can see that, at the macro level with some of these wild theories, but you see it at the micro level too, where if you have a church, for instance, that the pastor has not shown good leadership and there's not a lot of trust, rumors and theories fly, true or untrue. You have a pastor that's really good or have a leader that's really good in an organization, those are at a minimum because people trust him or her. So I think, number one, trust is low. I think number two, it gives people a false sense of comfort. Rather than leaning into the fact that we are in a fallen world and there's a lot of hurt and brokenness in the world, and there's a kind of a mystery of why God allows certain things to happen, it's easier and it's comforting to kind of fall back into a theory that everything. You have the secret knowledge that you know really what's going on. It's a false comfort. I would say it ultimately is unsatisfying because the best comfort, the true comfort, is in knowing that God, who is sovereign, who knows all things, and while we don't understand his ways and his purposes, as we read like in the prophets, we know that he's in charge. And I think an antidote to this is the kind of faith we see like in Habakkuk, where Habakkuk says, how long, O Lord, are you gonna let this injustice prevail? And how long are you going to do this? And God gives Habakkuk some answers. I'm going to send this army here, and I'm going to do this. But he doesn't really give him much. And yet at the end, Habakkuk says, well, if all these things are bad, I'm still going to praise the Lord. Or think of Job, right? Job wants answers for why he's suffering. God doesn't give him any answers. But his answer is that I can trust God and that he's good. That's a better way to think of it than a conspiracy theory idea, is that, there's you can connect the dots and make it happen. Really, the only way to connect the dots is what Paul says, that we don't fight flesh and blood, but principalities and powers. It's a fallen, broken world, and those are the dots that God has connected. That we're in a world that's corrupted and marbled through with sin, a world where there's an enemy, Satan, that's the devil, and people entrapped and enslaved. That's the conspiracy. However, when Jesus cried, "It is finished" on the cross, he defeated that conspiracy. And there's now, not to sound too cliche, but there's a conspiracy of redemption, of love. God is renewing and restoring the world. So I think Christians need to be wise and careful about that. I think just some practical stuff too is we need to say, if this idea confirms my worldview already, if this story, if this idea, if this theory sounds too good to be true and it confirms what I already believe about people I don't like, I need to be skeptical of it. I need to have doubt it. And I need to ask questions like, is this actually true? Or do I just want it to be true?
Our team at D6 have put together top family ministry resources that will help you do family ministry well. We call it D6 Plus, an online monthly subscription for every age and stage of ministry. Adult, youth, and children's leaders can now enjoy ready-to-use family ministry resources and training from the team at D6 Family. What can you expect with D6 Plus? First, you get the D6 conference year-round, with a media library filled with main stage talks and breakout sessions from every year of the D6 conference. D6 Plus also provides teacher training videos and emails to help your team excel at family ministry. D6 Plus includes a toolbox of one-page talking sheets to guide families through pain points. D6 Plus also offers sermons and lesson outlines, countdown videos, and creative graphics. In addition to the resources and training provided online, D6 Plus members receive other perks: family ministry books sent directly to you throughout the year for free, plus special VIP benefits at the D6 conference. D6 Plus, family ministry resources and training to help you and the parents in your church have an excellent family ministry.
Well, I'm talking to Dan Darling right now about his new book, Away with Words, excuse me. Now, Dan, before we started talking, I was scrolling through Twitter a little bit, and I noticed that Mulan is trending, and not trending for good reasons. Disney's in a little bit of hot water because of some of the locations they filmed in. And that made me think about how cancel culture has become such a hot topic today. It makes us angry when the mob goes after Chick-fil-A for holding to biblical principles. But sometimes as Christians, we feel a bit more inclined to join the mob when it's going after something that we see as immoral. As Christians, how do we approach this philosophy of cancel culture?
I think that's a good question. It's complicated for a number of reasons. I think number one, I am really nervous about cancel culture, and not criticism, but this idea, I think that's on the far left, that kind of, if you're not woke enough, that you get pushed out. Like we see, like what happened with Barry Weiss in the New York Times. We see, situations like people being, pushed out of positions. This idea that we want to punish people who disagree with us. We don't want to just disagree. We want to punish them, push them out of society. I've even seen posts like saying, we need to really punish Trump voters and all this stuff. But I also think it can exist on the right too, right? If you're not sufficiently supportive of Trump, there's kind of a, cancel culture in that respect. The idea of boycotting is really interesting because it's been used on left and right for a long time, some which have been effective and some have been not. You think the greatest example is kind of the Rosa Parks boycott, right? Where she does the bus boycott, and that really that was really effective as a civil rights moment. Most of the times boycotts are not that effective, right? Like, you're mad that Starbucks doesn't have the right cups, you're going to boycott it. Is that really happening? And most people just end up going back to Starbucks anyway, or Target for their bathrooms. Or I'm not a huge fan of boycotts. It's funny, it used to be the right, when I was growing up, that was really the boycott folks. Boycott Disney, boycott this, boycott that, and we were mocked by the press. And I think it was kind of foolish. It seems a lot of them come from the left now, that, if the the owner of a Mexican food company appears at the White House, and everyone should boycott that food. I don't think those will be that effective either, because people will just end up making consumer decisions that they want to do. There are times I do think, like with Mulan, it's really interesting. I don't know that Disney's going to be boycotted, but it is interesting, and I think it is good that people are calling out Disney's willing complicity with what's going on in China with the Uyghurs, and being willing to film over there and kind of accept plaudits from the propagandists over there. But at the same time, not being willing to film in Georgia because Georgia passed a pro-life bill. So that's interesting. And I think, I think at some level there's a place for a principled, like, I'm not going to participate, or I'm not going to buy this because of their values. It's hard to be consistent with boycotting, though, because, every corporation, every organization at some level is probably endorsing or giving money to or sponsoring things that you don't agree with. And I just don't know. You can't create a perfect Christian subculture bubble with organizations that only correspond to your values. I just don't know that that's possible, or that that's worthy. We're talking about people who are not believers and not Christians. And does a boycott send a message? Does it unintentionally hurt employees or people in that company that are making goods? I don't know. Those are really weighty questions, to be honest with you.
Now, I know this is going to sound shocking, but sometimes Christians aren't the kindest to each other on social media.
I'm stunned that you would say that.
Yeah. In a way with words you wrote, and this made me laugh out loud when I read this, but you said social media often brings out our inner Pharisee. What do you mean by that?
I think it's important for us to understand some of the incentives for Christians on social media. So, for instance, I think Twitter right now, and to some extent Facebook, really incentivizes Christians to point out how they're so much not like those other kind of horrible Christians, right? And, to distinguish yourself as like, yeah, there are some Christians that are really terrible. I'm not one of them. It's almost like I tweeted like a few months ago that on Twitter, Christians are good at confessing everyone else's sins. We're kind of like that example Jesus shared of being at the temple, and the Pharisee is beating his, the Pharisee is saying, I'm not, he's praying loudly so everyone can hear him. Dear God, thank you. I'm glad I'm so not like that tax collector. And that's kind of what we're doing on social media. Like, hey, just so everyone knows, I'm not that kind of Christian. And I think we have to be careful with that. There's a perverse incentive to do that is unchristian. And I think it's really toxic right now, especially during the election. So, hey, I just want everyone to know I'm not a Trump voter. I'm better than that. I'm not like those terrible evangelicals. I'm different. Or I just want everyone to know that I'm not like one of those squishy progressive Christians. I'm different. And we got to ask ourselves when we post, why am I doing this? And one of the things I try to do in my book is get underneath why we do what we do, right? And asking ourselves, what are we trying to do? Social media is public. We're on stage. We're in public. And there is a tendency to want to posture and perform for our tribe, to say all the right things so that our tribe gives us affirmation. And I think we have to guard against that.
Yeah, definitely. Now, speaking of not being kind, you cite research in your book that says 40% of Americans blame the 2016 election for the damaging of a close relationship. Well, here we are again, and another presidential election is right around the corner. how do we keep from making Thanksgiving and Christmas from being really awkward?
Well, I think first of all, that's a great question. First of all, we have to determine that we're not going to let politics be a litmus test for friendship and love. And that, when, politics is really important, especially in a representative republic. It's the art of trying to get involved in our society in order to love our neighbor better. We want to shape the society in which our neighbor is living. I think Christians should be involved, and it's vital. I don't think we can step back. But while politics is a useful tool, it's not ultimate. And whenever we make it ultimate, we make it into almost kind of a quasi-religion. And we know this when we determine friendships and love, not based on, when we determine it based on political affiliation or political beliefs. And, I almost lost a really good friendship in 2016 over a stupid political argument. I actually remember where I was in a Home Depot, and I was tapping on a message to my friend saying basically something like, you need to put away the adult coloring books, or something really snarky. And I almost severed a lifelong friendship. And thankfully we reconciled and we're great friends today. But I thought to myself after a few months, this was really dumb. It's good to have strong opinions. It's good to stand up for the things that are right. But, going to Thanksgiving, going to Christmas, if you're progressive and you think Trump is like the worst president in history and your relatives all vote for Trump, you need to see them not as Trump voters. You need to see them as human beings made in the image of God. They're not the sum total of their vote or their opinions. If you are a conservative and your family is a bunch of, West Coast liberals, you need to not see them as West Coast liberals, as liberals. You need to see them as whole people made in the image of God. People are not the sum total of their opinion. And love should transcend this. Listen, I have friends, godly people who are better people than me in every way, who love Trump and think he's like the 13th apostle, like he can do no wrong. And I have disagreements with them, and we go round and round, and I agree with them on some things, and I disagree with them on some things, but I love them, and we're friends. And I don't think anything less of them. I have other friends who can't stand Trump and think he's basically the worst president we've ever had. And I go round and round with them, and I agree with them on some things, and I disagree with them on some things, but I love them. They're better people than I am. And look, that's the way we need to do it. And as Christians, the gospel should transcend these things. And I don't mean to be cliche, because I think there's serious issues at stake and important conversations. But to make politics a litmus test of friendship and fellowship is really, I think, anti-gospel. I think, I've been reading Eugene Peterson lately, and he has a book on the life of David, and he talks about how, David gathered around him all these misfits. And he talked about how this is the kingdom of God. He's like, if you are discouraged by the people you see in the church, the hypocrites and the liars and the misfits, he said, this is what God is doing. This is who the kingdom of God is. And don't be surprised when God redeems people who are not nice, including yourself. And so I think that's how we have to approach it. So go to Christmas, go to Thanksgiving, enjoy your family, see them for who they are. Don't put politics at the front of your mind, and be human. And that's how you do it.
Yeah. Now, I know that with the ugliness that comes with it, there is that temptation just to shut it all down. Like, that's kind of where I am with Facebook right now. I'm like, I just don't even want it. I just forget it. Goodbye. Don't want to deal with it. Is that taking it too far? Just saying, I don't need it. Goodbye. Or do we have a responsibility to actually engage with what's going on?
It depends. I think it depends on your calling, right? There's a tendency to say, okay, I want to shut off of social media and I don't want to be part of it. And I actually respect that. And there's times I think people might need to step away and just say, for the good of my soul, this is toxic. I need to back away. I do think this is where people are engaging conversations. So I don't think all Christians should disengage, but I do think we have to say, regulate our social media diet and say, what is healthy for me? I do think what is really unhealthy is to kind of be, as some people say, very online, where your whole life revolves around your online life. And I've met people like that they're just absolutely formed and catechized by Twitter, and their only friends are people who they agree with on Twitter. And the truth is, Twitter and Facebook are not real life. They're snapshots, but they're not real life. A lot of people are walking around right now doing their work, doing their jobs, and they're not online. They don't know the last 10, 15 Christian controversies. And so I think that's healthy. I think if we are going to engage, and particularly politics, we should do it in a fair way. We should ask ourselves, is what I'm saying true? Is what I'm saying fair? Am I sharing stories and articles that confirm my biases? If so, I need to question them. Am I treating people with whom I disagree with dignity? So I think you can have really robust conversations online, even disagreements, as long as you're having conversations in good faith, and you're keeping it civil, and you're trying to end well. There are some folks that don't argue in good faith, and I think you should avoid those. People who are trolls, people who just want to troll you. I don't think it's worth time. But for the most part, I think we can do this if we remember that we're in public. When you're having a disagreement on Twitter, on Facebook, remember people are watching, right? So even if, let's say you have 500 followers on Twitter, or 250 followers or whatever, and that's fairly easy for folks to have. Well, that's still a room of 250 people. Like, much less if you have 10,000 people or 20,000 or 100,000. Now you're talking stadiums of people. Would you engage in a public debate on a stage? Would you use the kind of words and language that we use on Twitter? And if not, I think we need to reevaluate. We need to imagine ourselves that we're in public. And if so, I think that shapes the way we speak.
Well, Dan, I'll get you out of here on this one. You have 4 kids. How are you and your wife helping them navigate the online world?
Well, that's a great question. I am very nervous about the way that social media, I'm nervous about kids using social media for a couple of reasons. I think number one, I'm nervous about them being formed and discipled by whatever the narratives are on social media. I'm also nervous about the peer pressure and the perverse incentives, the way that they have to perform, and kids are not fully formed in terms of their maturity and their brains, and I think it can cause anxiety, cause all these issues. So we're very, very careful about our kids having access to social media. I'm not comfortable at all. I mean, I think my daughter has a private Instagram, pretty innocent. She does hardly post anything. I'm just nervous about it. My daughter said, "Hey, can I have Twitter?" I'm like, absolutely not. Twitter is just not, just the way that if you post something wrong, people can crush you. And it's, I'm nervous about the way people with powerful platforms can ruin people on Twitter. So I'm very careful about that. I think we have to be very wise. I've read books like iGen by Gene Twenge and some other books that have really warned about that. So I think at the same time, I think we have to prepare our kids for life in a digital age. So we're not sending them into the 1950s. We're sending them into the 2020s. And so we have to kind of ease them in a way, kind of like we do with driving a car and other things, to the reality they're going to face. But it's definitely a challenge for parents. I would say this about social media and kids. In the old days, I forget who said this. In the old days, you had the locker room, you had the recess, you had the hallway where kids would face peer pressure and maybe bullying or maybe just the pressure and the drama, but then they could go home and kind of end all that. They say with social media, you have that 24/7 that never shuts off. And I don't think that's healthy for kids.
Well, if you want to hear more from Dan, you can follow him on Twitter at Dan Darling. Also, you can check out his article in the winter edition of The Brink magazine, where he talks about this very topic. And his new book, Away with Words, is available now, and I highly, highly, highly recommend it. So Dan, thank you so much for joining us again. We'll talk next time you have another book.
Yeah, I'd love to come back on, and I love the work you're doing here. Glad to be in Brink. It's a great magazine. And so, check that out, everybody.
What a timely message, and so much valuable information that I think we can really take to heart. I teach this concept to kids often. I think the Lord gave us 2 ears and 1 mouth for a reason. And the book of James backs it up when he says, be quick to listen and slow to speak. In other words, we need to get the full story and all the facts, maybe before we react or rage on, as he says, and on social media. There's a difference between reacting and responding. And, a response is calculated and a reaction is involuntary. And so often we need to take the moment to think. And like you said, we're not experts on everything. And there's some things that we might not need to chime in on, that it's not our place. And contrary to popular belief, being silent doesn't mean that you're complicit, and you can fight for social injustice in other ways without having to go and utilize social media to do so.
That's right. I really loved a piece that he said in there in direct relation to what you're saying, Josh. Don't assume that people are not communicating. And he used the analogy or the concept of, Tim Keller could be talking to his elders about an issue. And so I think we have to be careful about the expectations we're putting on leadership and on different people with different platforms, that just because they're not saying something that you can see on your screen doesn't mean that God's not using them and that they're not saying something with their life. Number one. Number two, I want to tell you something that God really used in this conversation. And when he talked about conspiracy theories, I'm someone, and I've shared this with our audience before, I do struggle with anxiety and fear. And I loved when he defined conspiracy theories, and that it gives people a false sense of comfort. And it's easier and comforting that what's going on, but it may not even be the truth. And so as long as our mind can write its own narrative, because that somehow brings us some sort of peace, that's a lie. Jesus came to give us peace, and we've got to make sure that we're not following our heart, but we're informing our heart. And I just really love that he addressed conspiracy theories in the middle of all this, just because I think it's a dangerous thing for us to follow those and allow our minds to write narratives that aren't true and real, and then post about them. So I thought that was really interesting and very challenging.
There's a phrase he used that I thought, man, this so describes social media. And I've never heard anybody other than Daniel say this. He said, social media often brings out our inner Pharisee.
Woo!
I'm telling you, when, and he talked about it's like, oh, I'm so glad I'm not like so-and-so over there praying in this manner. And I thought, oh my, we see somebody, we've got to post a better looking meal or a better looking vacation that we're on, or, we've got to one up somebody with a different comment, or we got to put people in their place. Man, if that doesn't describe social media, and I'd love to say I'm above that, because, I think I've only posted one plated meal in my life. I remember exactly where I was when I did it. But, I do get in my mind a comparison. Like when I see somebody post on a passionate area of mine of leadership or family ministry, I think, well, that's not right. My inner being wants me to just go, hey, let me tell you what really should happen. And then my yellow light comes on, and then I decide, do I want to go green light or yellow or red light on them? And I really do think through that. But it conjures up that inner Pharisee in us. And I loved how he described that. It's going to make me pause more regularly remembering that item.
Well, I am with you, Ron. So often I get stuck in the intersection. Like I just don't, do I go? Do I stop? Is it okay to post this? Because the truth is, like I said, what helped me was going, this is my digital family scrapbook. this is just for the memories. So when I'm old and forgetful, I can say, oh yeah, I went look back and I did that. And it's for me as much as it is for anybody down the road. But, when he posed that question, why are we posting this? Are we posting it to posture or perform? And that's where it gets tricky, and because we're called to be humble. And so often, we are, as the kids would say, we're posting just to flex on people. Like, I'm hanging out with this person, or I'm here, and the truth is we want to show our best side. It's our human nature. When we talked about blind dates in a couple episodes, how our social media is kind of like we want to portray ourselves to the world, show the best and hide the rest. And that is innately how we're wired up to do. But like Ron said, we're pretty good at confessing others' sins on social media, but we don't want to be called out.
Yeah, I don't have all the answers to this next area that he jumped into, and I think this is why people like Daniel help us navigate these waters so well. But when I teach, I'm most of you know I'm an adjunct professor for two different schools. I teach leadership and family ministry. But one principle I want our students to learn is a principle called convergence and divergence. Where do two thoughts come together, and where do two thoughts go separate ways? And Daniel brings up this convergence idea of where does cancel culture and boycotts come together? And I loved how he navigated that. And I got to confess, there are times I've seen Christianity, and maybe even in myself, felt justified ceasing to support a business. But then I get upset with the cancel culture group who wants to rewrite and trying to find where's that middle ground in there by showing our Christian testimony. But we can take that to the point where it's, as he said, it's hard to be consistent with boycotts across the board. Did any one of you wrestle with this in a way that I did? I don't have answers on this one, but I really loved how he took us to task on those topics.
He brought out a point just in our witness to the lost world, and how boycotting, what does that? He asked the question, which I value how he postured that. What message does a boycott send as a believer to a lost world?
Yes.
And just he's posing the question. I think it's a good question to ask. I don't think it's a hard answer. I think there's just, even there was a podcast a few weeks ago that we covered, and just a gentle answer. Yes. Gentleness was spoken, and just our gentle response. Gentleness, when gentleness drives our heart and drives our posts and drives our pictures, that shifts how people receive our heart. Because I will tell you, world, and this is what I feel like I'm taking away from this, is your social media does reveal a lot about you and your heart at the end of the day. What do you want the world to know about your heart? That's what it reveals.
It does. And it's we've heard this a million times, but people can tell a lot about a person by that. And that's why HR departments pay attention to people's social media. I was listening to the news a few weeks back, and even when people were being picked for positions of government, I heard of one person who went out and deleted 1,000 tweets that they had made because they didn't want people looking at it before they got selected. Yeah. And I'm like, see, that should be most telling. If you've got to delete it, you shouldn't have posted it to begin with. And Daniel made this other statement that I didn't want to forget. He said, people often post things on social media they would never say on a main stage platform speaking to thousands of people in person. I thought, ouch. Go with that. That's good.
Yeah. I mean, it's very true, because, and even, in this climate, I have seen this happen so often. And he even made this fact, he stated the fact that 40% of people confess to having relationships damaged due to political differences. Almost half of everybody, that I know or that has had a relationship damage due to a political difference. And my pastor Tom Hayden shared a few weeks back, and he just said, it saddens me that people will allow, a politician who will be in office for 4 to 8 years in some cases that doesn't even know their name or know they exist, to damage lifelong relationships with families and friends. and it just breaks my heart. As you know, I don't view people as a liberal or conservative, view them as a child of God, made in his image. And that's ultimately who and what we are.
You know, when we take a look at this incredible content that he has delivered, I do hope it gives us pause, just like Marianne has said, just like Josh has kind of warned us about. We're going to wrap up, and we're going to take a look at next week. We're going to be shifting gears a little bit from social media. That seems to be what we would consider assets. Our what do we call that, Josh? Our word assets, our influence assets. We're going to shift gears into financial assets, and we're going to talk through money and finance and how that impacts our family and what we can do to teach it to our kids, as our interview is going to be focused around Garrett Dickerson. So until then, we're going to be praying for you that maybe you apply that yellow light to your social media more than you ever have before. Until next week, we'll be praying for you. And we're praying you're looking for those intentional moments to connect with your family and friends around those teachable moments.
You've been listening to the D6 Podcast. You can learn more about D6 at d6family.com.